tough, but hello everybody, thank you for coming. My name's Gary Shaw. I live 5.5 miles from Indian Point. I moved up from New York City in the early 90s with a vague understanding that there was a nuclear plant and there was some issue about nuclear waste, but I wasn't terribly curious and I wasn't terribly concerned. And in February of 2000, when Con Edison still owned Indian Point 2, there was a steam pipe rupture which released radioactive steam into the atmosphere. We also learned that it released thousands of gallons of radioactive water directly through the Buchanan sewer system into the Hudson River. And I realized maybe I should become more educated about this nuclear plant and nuclear power in general. And since that day, I've been trying to shut Indian Point first and hope that we can shut every nuclear plant in this country because it's just the wrong technology for large-scale electricity production. So that's where I started out. I've been doing this, again, for over 10 years now. And I'm going to talk about the latest report that was put out. It was done by a company called Synapse Energy Consultants. They're up in New England. This was funded by the Natural Resources Defense Council and Riverkeeper, two very long-term environmental groups. And I'll go through some of the findings. What I was planning to do was I've read through the report. It's very dry. It's not a lot of fun. It's very technical, puts a lot of charts in. If you're a numbers person, it's a really good thing to read through because what it does is it confirms reports that we've seen in the past. The promoters of Indian Point will tell you we cannot get along without their energy. Since Fukushima, the Entergy Corporation, which owns Indian Point, has put multiple millions of dollars into advertising campaigns talking about their contribution to the lower New York grid and how we simply can't go without them. This report, once again, puts the lie in its place. And so this is what this was done, just so everybody knows. In 2006, Congresswoman Nita Lowey secured $1 million to get a study for replacement energy to be done by the National Academy of Sciences. At that time, the conclusions of that report were that there are no technical reasons why the energy from Indian Point cannot be replaced. The major problems are political will and financial considerations. Since 2006, the terrible economy, as well as increases in energy efficiency, make the entire circumstances different and make it even easier to replace Indian Point. The Synapse report shows that there's an adequate amount of energy coming in, and there's a lot more capacity coming in based on the New York Independent System Operators Gold Book, which is a planning book for the next 10 years, going from 2011 through 2021. The NISO, the Independent System Operators, are the people who oversee the entire grid in New York State, and they're sort of the authority on the grid. So Synapse used their gold book as much of the information that they used to create the report, and they were even conservative in terms of how much of that planning report they thought would actually get accomplished. And so Synapse report is actually potentially more conservative than it needs to be. I also want to remind everybody that in August of 2003, the entire Northeast grid went dark. When the grid came back to life, because of the nuclear plant's operations, they had to stay offline for days and days after the grid was back. The subways ran, your air conditioners hummed, you sat in your living room and watched TV, and nobody felt the loss of the entire output of Indian Point not being there. So that was just a little clue that Indian Point might not be necessary. Rather than trying to summarize what the report actually said and put it in my own words, what I thought I would do is read some excerpts from it. And this is from the executive summary. Our key findings include the following. There is currently a surplus of electricity capacity in the regions near Indian Point, and if Indian Point were not relicensed, there is no need for new capacity to maintain reliability until 2020. Con Edison, serving New York City, currently relies on only a small portion of Indian Point to meet its reliability requirement. The other two distribution companies in the regions near Indian Point, which includes the Long Island Power Authority and the Central Hudson Gas and Electric, do not currently rely upon any Indian Point capacity to meet their reliability needs. Con Edison, who's the only deliverer of energy to Lower Westchester and the New York City grid. Back up for 1 second. Indian Point's output is about 22,060 megawatts. When Indian Point was first sold, and there are two operating reactors at Indian Point, one used to be owned by Con Edison, the other was owned by the New York Power Authority. In 2001, just prior to September, the Entergy Corporation, after the New York State electricity market was deregulated, the Entergy Corporation purchased both of those properties. At that time, Con Edison and the New York Power Authority contracted to buy all the output of Indian Point in long-term contracts. Those contracts are now changing, and now, as of 2011, rather than purchasing 2,060 megawatts from Indian Point, Con Edison and NYPA combined are only purchasing about a quarter of that output, 560 megawatts. And Con Edison, who delivers all the electricity to New York, has only contracted 350 directly. They get 200 additional megawatts as a subcontract from the New York Power Authority. What that indicates is that Con Edison doesn't feel that Indian Point is critical, because they would not want to be in a position where they didn't have sufficient supply to deliver electricity to all of the residential and industrial people that they serve. And so if Con Edison can not contract from Indian Point, it suggests that Indian Point's hypothesis or communications that they're absolutely essential is simply non-factual. Both New York State and New York City currently have a substantial surplus of capacity. I read that we won't need it until we won't even need to think about it until after 2020. There are currently roughly 5,500 megawatts of renewable resources in the NYSO interconnection queue, the majority of which are wind projects. Only a portion of the wind capacity is considered to be available for purposes of NYSO reliability planning. Therefore, of those 5,365 megawatts of wind capacity, it's equivalent to about 1,154 megawatts, because wind is not always blowing, so while it has a maximum of over 5,000, Synapse in their report is being very conservative. Even if only 1/2 of this capacity is eventually developed, it would provide roughly 244 megawatts of renewable resources in the regions near Indian Point, and 333 megawatts of renewable resources in the rest of the state. Once again, the ultimate goal of virtually all environmental organizations is to have a renewable portfolio of energy. And New York State, towards that end, is doing a lot of work. Our governor is supporting new energy sources, and we have a lot more things happening. They also, Mayor Bloomberg had a report done. It's called the Charles River Associates Report. In the Synapse report, they talk about some of the assumptions being made by Charles River. And Charles River was using the 2010 NYSO Gold Book rather than the 2011, and really don't explain why they're doing that. But the assumptions about energy requirements over the next few years were elevated in 2010. This horrible recession that we're having, as well as energy efficiency policies, have made our electricity market a little different. And so I suggest that anybody who really wants to get into the details, again, there's a lot of charts and details and numbers in here, go to the Riverkeeper website. It's riverkeeper.org, and you can get a copy of the report and look it up for yourself. So there you go.
Lots of facts there. Does anybody have a question that something that you're burning to ask Gary about?
You can't crank up and crank down nuclear power plants all the time. So it's giving its output constantly, while you can have other types, other forms or other sources of electricity can be tamped down when they're not needed. So in the middle of the night, when electricity draw is very low, and electrons, by the way, think about electricity supply as a big lake or a big pool, and it's being fed by a lot of different sources, and it has a lot of drainage pipes going all over the place. So electrons will go wherever the path of least resistance is, and some of the electricity from Indian Point that's not necessarily contracted by the delivery systems in the New York area will actually go to New York City. And I believe that that's what they're talking about, because they're in the middle of the night when everybody else is tamped down and Indian Point is still cranking it out, and it's the middle of winter and air conditioners aren't humming. They are accounting for a higher percentage of the usage in New York City than is really contracted. So it's sort of like it's almost like a magician's misdirection trick. Technically, they can make that statement, but the very fact that the lower grid only contracts about 25% of their energy, not the usage of the area, but only 25% of their energy, suggests that they're really not necessary. I'll also tell you that in May of 2003, I testified before the New York City Council, the Environmental Protection Committee of the New York City Council, and Entergy was there as well with their financial experts. They were called the NERA is the name. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for. But they started throwing lots and lots of different numbers at the chairman of the committee, James Gennaro. He's a councilman from Queens. And he said, those numbers boggle my mind. Tell me, and by the way, at that time, Entergy and Indian Point had this big advertising campaign going. If we shut Indian Point, your energy costs, your electricity bills might go up 10, 20, 30% or more. And when Jim Gennaro badgered these people and said, tell me what the impact would actually be on the average ratepayer in New York City, and this assumes no additional capacity, no change in policies, they hemmed and hawed and said, 5 to 8%, with no changes in anything. So they will manipulate the numbers and obfuscate the reality, and it's a load of crap. Empirical data. When the Connecticut Yankee plant closed, the electricity rates didn't go up in that area. When the Maine Yankee plant closed, the same thing happened. This report estimates that there could be a couple of % difference in real dollars to the average ratepayer in New York. It turns into about $50 a year.
Less than $1.
Right. Less than $1 a week is what this report says, and even the Charles River, which they cite, even the Charles River talked about really a minimal amount of money to the average ratepayer, to the average residential ratepayer, if Indian Point goes away.